I did not expect to be making another ChatGPT malware thing, especially since ChatGPT apparently is currently down for some sort of maintenance. I think they're actually going to throw it behind a paywall. That's what the rumors are right now. But judging by the popularity of my last video, which I'll show on screen here, a lot of people are interested in it. And I've seen some really good commentary by people way smarter than me, to include Marcus Hutchins, on the kind of reliability and the usability of ChatGPT for malware authors. So I think it does warrant another discussion. I wrote up a LinkedIn post that I'll throw in the description about kind of my thoughts on ChatGPT for malware authors, but it basically all organizes around three different points. So first off, ChatGPT is not going to spit out a working, usable, interesting piece of malware. You might get it to spit out something that essentially relates to like piping, like CMD or the command line to some sort of web interface or some sort of like socket-based interface, but that in itself isn't really useful. And as we'll talk about here in a second, you should have adequate defenses against something like that. But essentially, all ChatGPT is going to allow you to do is I'm going to give it a prompt. It's going to give me a potentially useful piece of code in whatever language I prompted in. So it's difficult to say ChatGPT is great for malware developers, because you could also say the same about like Google search. I could hop on Google, say, how do I create some sort of public key encryption algorithm that I can use in a piece of malware. You wouldn't say that Google itself is inherently malicious. ChatGPT is just a tool. It happens to be a tool that is possibly a little bit more useful than a generic like Google search for certain applications, but you're not going to be able to just give ChatGPT a single simple prompt and it spit out a useful piece of malware. You're going to have to use a little bit of creativity there. So the way I used it in the old video, which I'll link wherever, is basically how can I use like these prompts to give me a useful code snippet that explains, for example, a Windows API call. So I can use it to say, hey, I want to make a Windows API call to set this registry key. And it will give me a very small character limited code snippet that helps me do something like that. I could just as easily use this for React code. In fact, I believe I've seen people who have used this for, web application, development. So this is not just malware development specific. Like ChatGPT is going to be a very useful thing for lots of different developers. Malware developers, honestly, are probably low on the list of people who are going to find ChatGPT particularly useful. Second, ChatGPT is not malicious. Like I said, you can use it to create web apps. You can use it to do all kinds of other things. It's a chat bot. It actually has some fairly interesting replies to lots of different prompts that are completely non-malicious. So you can't call ChatGPT malicious in the same way that you can't call Google search malicious, just because you can use it for potentially sort of malicious use cases. It doesn't make it inherently malicious in and of itself. I think the conversation kind of like got skewed in the like mainstream discussion space, because probably honestly people like me were putting out videos and content about potential use cases, and people were running with that and saying like this is going to be huge in the malware development world. It's simply not. So it's not malicious. It's not necessarily like a one size like fits all kind of use case for malware development, but frankly, it should be incredibly low on your information security team's like focus. Frankly, a piece of malware that uses ChatGPT, or a malware developer who uses ChatGPT to create malware, does not necessarily create better malware in any kind of shape or form. The code snippets that I got back were very basic. They weren't necessarily stealthy. They weren't necessarily even that interesting, honestly. It was just kind of like basic stuff, which is what you would expect from a general purpose kind of chatbot API that knows how to write code. Um, you know, the code that you're usually going to get from malware developers who are going to heavily rely on ChatGPT, it's going to be basic stuff. A malware developer that uses ChatGPT to kind of accelerate their development, they might you might see some kind of like decrease in the delta, or the amount of time that is necessary to create that piece of malware in the same way that somebody like a malware developer is good at Google searching. But basically, if you've got somebody who's just basically like, copy pasting code snippets from ChatGPT in order to create malware, it's going to be like very basic malware. It's not going to be particularly interesting. It's not going to be very stealthy. It's not going to be very interesting unless that malware developer is just using it as kind of like an alternative to Google search. Basically, you're not going to get anything interesting out of it. What I think ChatGPT will be for malware developers is essentially just a better Google search. It's going to be something that says, hey, I forgot exactly how you implement this specific thing within the Windows API, or I forgot exactly how I'm going to use pointers in the specific context, or I've got this bug that I need to fix. I'm going to pass ChatGPT a snippet of code, and hopefully it will help me debug it. I don't think the hype is really warranted here. And I will take some level of blame in kind of pushing interesting research on ChatGPT and its relation to malware development without kind of giving the, hey, this isn't that big of a deal kind of disclaimer. That's really kind of the purpose of this video. It's going to be kind of a short one. It's basically saying that, like, hey, this isn't that big of a deal. It's not really changing the space all that much. And if you've got malware developers who are heavily relying on ChatGPT to create their malware, chances are the malware is not going to be all that interesting and not going to be something that your information security team should really be worried about. And here's kind of the crux of like the practical matter here. At the end of the day, if you've got a piece of malware on system, it doesn't really matter if ChatGPT was at all involved in the development of that piece of malware. A ChatGPT-enabled piece of malware is not any different from any other piece of malware. It's a binary that lands on your system that does a thing. So if your information security team is already looking for malware that does a thing, they're not going to notice any difference necessarily between ChatGPT-enabled malware and normal run-of-the-mill malware. Frankly, ChatGPT-enabled malware is more likely to be like low quality because it's probably a script kiddie who doesn't really know what it is that they're writing, who is developing this malware and throwing it onto your system. So all that is to say, I don't think this hype and all of this attention that's being paid to like AI-enabled malware is warranted at all. I haven't seen any indication that AI is really assisting in the development or the practical use of malware. I might be wrong. I've talked to a lot of people who are way smarter than me who tend to agree on that point. But basically, this video is more to kind of dispel the hype and to kind of say, like, malware is malware. At the end of the day, if somebody uses Google search versus Yandex versus ChatGPT to ask questions and figure out how to debug malware, it doesn't matter to the common SOC person who is looking for this kind of stuff, the common reverse engineer who's looking this kind of stuff. Frankly, if I were reverse engineering some of the code that I was able to generate using ChatGPT, I would probably have an easier time, frankly, than I would malware that's written by somebody who's actually competent and isn't relying on a lot of these tools, or is maybe relying on the tools as kind of like a debugger. So that's really about it. That's really all I had to say on the matter. Basically, don't believe the hype. Just reverse figure out stuff, learn new things. And if you're on the development side and you're kind of learning more about malware development itself, if ChatGPT comes back up or if it's not behind a paywall, use it to learn more. Use it to kind of understand the code better, but don't heavily rely on it, just like you wouldn't heavily rely on copy pasting Stack Overflow code, for example. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Take it easy. Peace.